What is carbon dioxide?
I went to high school, but that's carbon dioxide is a gas.
Okay.
I'm not a professional to talk about carbon dioxide so much, but
Is it the major part of our atmosphere? Or?
it's a huge part of our atmosphere, yes.
It's actually a very small part of our atmosphere.
Well, okay.
If we spent those trillions of dollars and became carbon neutral by 2050 in the United States, which you advocate, how much will it reduce world temperatures?
I don't have an answer for that.
You don't know?
No.
You just think we ought to spend the money and then see what happens?
I think as an athlete, I think if we spend that money and invest in our future, hopefully those temperatures stop rising.
You think we ought to abolish the police, do you?
Again, not the topic I'm here to talk about today.
I know.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is blaming Hamas over the latest round of ceasefire talks in Qatar. Israeli officials say negotiators left the table in Doha after the talks hit a dead end. Netanyahu says his country will not surrender to Hamas's, quote, delusional demands. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay is in Tel Aviv. Chris, what specifically caused this latest round of negotiations to fall through?
Hey, Lana. Yeah, these talks, they are behind closed doors. However, what we do know is that there had been renewed optimism surrounding the ceasefire talks because Israel said it was open to a U.S. proposal that would have seen 40 hostages, Israeli hostages who have been in Hamas captivity for more than 5 months now, released in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners and a 6-week pause in fighting. However, Hamas did not agree to that. Now, both sides, they do blame each other for this, but one thing we do know is that over and over again, it does seem to be Hamas who always goes back to a demand for something like a permanent ceasefire or to having IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, pulling out completely from the Gaza Strip, effectively waving the white flag, and Israel has made it clear that's not something they're about to do.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the U.S. is really putting the most pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to date. What is the current status of his plans for expanded operations in Rafah?
After they pulled that delegation from Washington earlier this week, remember, they were sending a delegation to Washington to discuss alternatives over a full-blown ground invasion in Rafah. Netanyahu pulled that delegation earlier this week over these divisions that have just been widening between the United States and Israel over really the horrific images that we've seen coming out of the Gaza Strip. The reported 30,000 plus people who have died. There's a shortage of food, etc. Again, Israel doesn't deny this. It simply says this is not our fault. And meanwhile, this is a threat that continues to not just threaten the lives of the Palestinian people, but us as well. The United States, for instance, wants to have a two-state solution. Israel says there's no way we can have a two-state solution so long as Hamas is still in power. And right now, Rafah is this final bastion of Hamas battalions that's backed up by, lots and lots of tunnels, hundreds of miles of tunnels going throughout the entire Gaza Strip, more than even Israel was aware of before this war. And again, from Israel's perspective, it needs to be rooted out because Hamas continues to launch rockets. Hamas continues to threaten other October 7-like attacks on Israeli territory. So in order for there to be a two-state solution from Israel's perspective, they have to go into Rafah in order to remove Hamas from the Gaza Strip.
All right, Chris Livesay, thank you.
Thanks, Lana.
What's your name? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And do you believe the 2020 election was stolen? According to the Washington Post, the RNC is sussing out whether new applicants, where they stand on the last election, using something of a litmus test, according to the paper. So on the subject of the last election, you might wonder where exactly the party itself stands. Does the RNC believe it was stolen, as their candidate continues to falsely claim? NBC's Garrett Haake sat down with the new co-chair of the party, LaraTrump, to ask what the president's daughter-in-law thinks happened in 2020.
Is it going to be the position of the RNC in 2024 that the 2020 election was not fairly decided or that it was stolen somehow?
Well, I think we're past that. I think that's in the past. We learned a lot. Certainly, we took a lot of notes. Right now, we have 23 states that have 78 lawsuits in these states to ensure that it is harder to cheat and easier to vote.
Joining us now, NBC News senior correspondent Garrett. Hey, Garrett, I know you asked her a whole lot of questions there, but I'd like to focus, if you don't mind, on the 2020 election. What does it mean when she says the party has moved past 2020?
Well, I think her point is that they're trying to focus on winning in 2024 and that relitigating elements of, why Donald Trump talks about the race that he does isn't helpful at a party level. We know that to be true because we saw it in the midterms where candidates who were kind of towing that line and making the idea of, the lines about a stolen election a key part of their platform lost up and down the ballot. And so I think what I saw from LaraTrump was someone who's trying to modernize the Republican Party to get them into the modern era with things like voting by mail and voting early, but struggling to grapple with the history of why Republican voters don't trust those systems and how much of an impact on that fact comes from her father-in-law, the party's nominee. And I think that tension is going to be at the heart of everything that happens here between Donald Trump and a Republican Party that's desperate to stop talking about this and start trying to focus on winning the next election. Well,
that tension is interesting because, as the Washington Post, as I reported at the top, there's apparently candidate interviews, according to that paper, where the candidates that are trying to work at the RNC are being asked how they see the 2020 election. So how does the party move past it if that's still a question that is being asked of folks who are trying to work there?
Well, I have my own reporting on this, Katie, and I think I'll say two things. Number one, my understanding of this was that this would be for folks who are working in specific swing states where the RNC is involved in lawsuits about how voting is going forward, or whether they did have concerns in 2020 about how elections were administered. And my understanding of these questions is they were sort of open-ended means to gauge how familiar people were with the election laws in their states and kind of how they would handle situations that might come up. But I think we also need to realize that this is not a fringe position within the Republican Party to question the 2020 election results. Something like 2/3 of Republican voters have some degree of question about whether Joe Biden won the election legitimately, as we know he did. You do the math, that's 50, 60 million voters. So the idea that people who would be working for the RNC might share similar questions should not surprise us, even if the data isn't there to back up that position. That's where a lot of the Republican Party is right now.
Good point, Garrett. Hey, Garrett, thank you very much.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right.
Former President Donald Trump this morning criticized a New York judge who placed a gag order on him just yesterday. He called the ruling illegal and un-American. That judge cited Trump's history of, quote, threatening and inflammatory remarks about people involved in his legal cases. Now, that move prevents him from commenting publicly about witnesses, prosecutors, court staff, and jurors in his upcoming criminal hush money trial. That's over a payment to an adult film actor back in 2016. Let's bring in CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa now. Bob, you and I had the pleasure on Monday of covering Trump's dual split-screen court moment. And this isn't the first time, though, that we've seen Trump imposed with a gag order. In the past, he just pays fines for violating them. In your point of view, could this be effectively enforced?
It's unlikely to be enforced. He's an active candidate, for federal office. And former President Trump has shown repeatedly that he largely ignores gag orders, believe they're an affront to his free speech rights. And there's no sign yet that his lawyers or the candidate are going to listen to this gag order in any way, though they know they can only do so much. We saw when Trump got gag orders in the civil fraud case, or at least some direction from the judge to not speak up about certain elements of the case. He generally abided by that. But this is a candidate and a client who his habit and routine is to lash out.
And we saw the same with the E. Jean Carroll civil trial. That entire case was based on Trump's public remarks about her, despite being found liable. We know that tomorrow is set to be the first hearing on Trump's Georgia election interference case. For folks at home keeping track, that's one of the 6 big cases Trump is facing. And the judge recently ruled that lead prosecutor on that case, Nathan Wade, should resign from the case. What do we expect to hear on that front tomorrow?
Well, Mr. Wade is no longer on the case. Fani Willis, the district attorney of Fulton County, remains on the case despite all of the scrutiny about her personal conduct, and she has vowed to plow ahead here and continue to prosecute in this sweeping way many people who are alleged to have taken part in a conspiracy to overturn the election result in Georgia. This is a case to watch as much as the New York case is, because now that all of the Fani Willis deliberation seems to have ebbed a bit, it's going to move forward, and it could be a trial that takes place closer to the election.
And we know from public statements Donald Trump has made, statements his legal team has made, that delaying these trials is part of the strategy, especially with this election coming up. In the classified documents case down in Florida, there do appear to be aspects of it tied up in delays. What's the latest on that front? How long could it continue? And what would be the effect of the delay?
It's tricky for the judge, Eileen Cannon, in the classified documents case, as well as Tanya Chutkin, the judge in the January 6th case. Both of those cases playing out on the federal level. They have to first see if this criminal trial over hush money payments in New York finishes in a 6-week period, let's say sometime in May or June of this year. And then at that point, with all of the different issues confronting them in their respective cases, they have to make a decision. Will they really have a trial in the summer or even fall before the election? And that's a tough decision for them in terms of timing and logistics. And that's something that really hovers on the horizon, especially on the classified records case, as all of these issues continue to come to the fore.
Yeah, so much happening on these fronts. Robert Costa from our D.C. Bureau, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. Vivek, how do you interpret what we saw in the last, 24 hours at NBC?
Look, I don't think it was a great decision for Ronna McDaniel to join NBC in the first place. After she chose NBC to moderate that third RNC debate, which I was critical of, I think it was poor optics and maybe poor substance for her to join NBC. But having had made that decision, I think it is unconscionable that NBC, without even hearing what she has to say, cuts her off in that way. It's just another embodiment of this cancel culture that has spread across not only media, but every sphere of our life. And I think we need more open debate in our country, not more silos. And I think it was a pathetic decision by senior management that apparently has a spine made of jelly at NBC, and they deserve to be criticized for it.
Okay, what about the fact that the left is constantly fighting amongst themselves? Every time they're fighting with each other is another day they're not training their fire at Donald Trump. Does that give you confidence?
Look, I think that they are unified in their mission to keep Donald J. Trump out of office. And I think that we would make a mistake to underestimate the extent to which the left is actually prepared to carry out its plan.
But they seem less disciplined.
We're in the middle of a war.
They seem less disciplined this time around.
In the short run, Jesse, yes, but I think we'd make a mistake to underestimate them. We have to stand up for what's right. And if we don't fight for it, I think we're going to see another loss.
All right. Thanks, Vivek. Thanks for fighting and standing up. We always appreciate it. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You won't get it anywhere else.